You're watching our comprehensive coverage of the interim budget here on CNBC TV 18. Joining me now, Arundhati Bhattacharya of Salesforce, also the former Chief of State Bank of India, and Vinayak Chatterjee. Ms. Bhattacharya and Vinayak, many thanks for joining us. Vinayak, I want to come to you first because ahead of the budget, when we spoke this morning, you said, mark my words, 13.5 lakh crores will be the capex number. It's not, Vinayak, so disappointed?
Yes, I will not say I'm disappointed, but let me put it in context that I think you're going to see this figure in the full budget because the government does not have a choice because of its stated macroeconomic policy that it is public expenditure in infrastructure and infrastructure capex that has been the prime mover of economic growth in this country of GDP. So the momentum has been 30% and 35% increase in the last 2 years. We were expecting a 30% increase this year also to keep the same momentum. The fact that it has come down to 11% just gives a feeling that it's merely an accounting carry-on budget for the next 2-3 months, because if the government does keep infrastructure investments reduced to a growth of only 11%, it will have serious consequences on the growth of GDP itself. So I would like to just share with you that keep the challenge going, Shireen. When you invite me on in June or July, I can bet now that the figure then is going to be 30 to 34 or 35 lakh crores, because without that kind of expenditure, you're not going to get 7% GDP growth that the country is expecting. But let me stop here.
I put that question to Mr. Somanathan, the Finance Secretary, who was just with me a couple of minutes ago, and asked him if this was going to be the new lay of the land, going back to an 11-12% kind of growth in capex. And his view was that, look, let's not fixate on a number, but he was also mindful of pointing out that we need to keep in mind the needs, and the government believes that private capex is starting to pick up, and his indication was that for the year, this seems like a legitimate, valid number.
For an interim budget, it is a number that is not open to questioning because it is valid only for 2 or 3 months. But mark my words, Shireen, the same government has said time and again that its stated economic policy is to boost the GDP of this country by public expenditure and infra capex. If you make it 1/3, I am sure as an economic analyst, you will also agree that it will have fairly serious ramifications on GDP growth itself. So mark my words, when the full budget is announced in June, July, you will see it reinstated at 30 lakh crores plus. Otherwise, we will have to bring it down. And the same Mr. Somanathan, actually on your on your CNBC show last year, I was present, made the point that this is the stated policy of the government. And he shared a confidential report which was present with the finance ministry that 1 rupee spent on infrastructure resulted in 3 rupees of GDP, whereas 1 rupee spent on direct benefit transfer resulted in 90 paisa of GDP. This was Dr. Somanathan last year, along with the stated government policy that infra investments will continue to be the prime mover of growth. And whether private capex is going to come into infrastructure is a big open question, because there is not yet enough confidence in private sector boards to go back unquestioningly into a PPP mode of yesteryears. Unless there is a drastic resetting of PPP, I am afraid we may be unduly optimistic of private capital filling a vast space between 11% growth and 30% growth in infra spends. But let me stop here.
Well, Vinayak, we will, of course, bring you back when we do have the full budget being presented, and let's see if your thesis holds good. But let me bring Arundhati Bhattacharya into the conversation. Ms. Bhattacharya, many thanks for joining us. The big takeaway from the budget really has been the fiscal consolidation roadmap that the government has laid out, down to 5.1%, and then, of course, the glide path. Banks reacting, bond markets reacting. On balance, your big takeaways from the interim budget?
Well, one thing, of course, is it appears to be a very confident budget. It is a budget for continuity. It indicates a roadmap of how things are going to be once the government resumes, resumes its office. And basically, therefore, they have been reticent in the way they have gone about ensuring that fiscal consolidation happens in good times so that there is space during difficult times. And on the other hand, they've also very well reiterated that it is the vulnerable section of the society that they're going to spend their maximum amount on. And that's why the Prime Minister also subsequently repeated that the 4 pillars, the vulnerable pillars, that is the weak, the youth, the farmers, and the women, who are going to be the beneficiary of the various schemes that the government is putting together, in order to ensure that these people also come up through the ranks and join the ranks of consumers, and they don't stay where they are today. Their contribution in GDP is actually very much required, because without that, again, I don't think our potential will be reached.
That is right. But I also wanted to understand from you, Ms. Bhattacharya, the announcement that's coming from the government as far as that 1 lakh crore rupee corpus is concerned for research and innovation. Of course, the nitty-gritties are yet to be worked out. But, directionally, what do you make of the signal that the government has sent out with that move, essentially saying, look, we're stepping in and we'll provide risk capital?
I agree with you, and it is very exciting, actually, because today is the age of innovation. Frankly speaking, without innovation, we'll be nowhere in the world economy. And if you look at it, they have extended the slogan of Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, which Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji had added Jai Vigyan, and now they have added Jai Anusandhan, meaning that they are going to go all out for innovation. So innovation is the way out for a country like ours, where creation of formal jobs cannot only be the government's duty. It would not be feasible for the government to come up with the kind of jobs that are required in order to take care of the youth. And therefore, we have to rely on innovations. We have to rely on the entrepreneur spirit of Indians in order to make sure that the youth of the country are getting opportunities. And therefore, this 1 lakh crore fund is actually something that was very, very important. I don't know how the workings will be or how exactly it is going to be operationalized, who will be the operationalizing agency, and how they will target the people who will actually be beneficiaries of this fund. But the thought behind it is the right thought. In today's day and age, it's something that is absolutely required.
Yes, in fact, I just asked the Economic Affairs Secretary those questions, and those are details that are currently being worked out by the government, so we will have to wait to see the nitty-gritties, the nuts and bolts. Vinayak Chatterjee, I want to come back now, and I know that you would have gone over the numbers threadbare as far as railway capex are concerned, defense capex, as well as the housing scheme that's been announced. Of course, even as far as the housing scheme is concerned, there is no allocation portioned so far. Mr. Somanathan saying that it is still a work in progress. But on the other heads, individual heads, your take?
Look, slowing down from an overall 11% growth in the total outlays, the outlays across most sectors have been pretty low. Road, for example, has, I took a cursory look, has gone up by some 25 or 30,000 crores, which is neither here nor there. So it's a reflection of the total depressed level of the growth in infra outlay. But as I said earlier, I am not reading too much into these figures for an interim budget, because I am taking the view that it is just a bit of accounting to allow the government to function for the next 2-3 months. I will wait for the big picture budget once a new government is in place. And I think that is the right time for us to discuss threadbare whether there are any great strategy changes in terms of intersectoral allocations between road and rail, or irrigation and water and rail, etc. The interim budget does not merit such incisive analysis, is my view.
Okay. Ms. Bhattacharya, I want to come back to you on a point that has been made by the DPAM Secretary, and the government now moving away from setting a disinvestment target, saying that there needs to be a paradigm change in the way that we look at disinvestment. We must look at it in the context of value unlocking as well, with the market cap of PSEs, CPSEs seeing a significant uptick, as well as the dividend contribution that comes in. And no word, of course, on bank privatization either, or the legislative action to take that forward wasn't expected in the interim budget. But do you believe that perhaps, that there is less appetite now to take that forward?
See, first of all, understand one thing. Setting this target is absolutely a wrong thing to do. You're giving a signal to the market that the government is desperate to sell. And the moment there is a desperation to sell, you will not actually be realizing its true value. You need to sell only when you don't need to sell, because that's the time when you will get the maximum value. Till such time, if there is a dividend income coming in regularly, you should sit with it. At the end of the day, this is an asset that was built with public money. It will go back to the public. But in the meanwhile, in the interim, the owners, which is the government, they can look to it as a generator of revenue. And definitely, I do not believe that you should be setting targets for this. This has to be opportunistic. You have to take the momentum when it is there in the market, and then you can definitely, encash as you need to. Again, given the revenue buoyancy and given the way the government is now proceeding, they may not actually be in desperate need to raise these revenues as well. So to that extent, I think, the government being a little more cautious about these matters, or being more, market savvy, so to speak, about these matters, bodes well for everybody.
All right, Vinayak Chatterjee. Since you insist that we must take this with a pinch of salt and wait for the grand finale, which is the full budget in July, what's your expectation going to be?
Same as I told you pre the budget speech. You wait till July and the full budget will give you a 30 to 35% increase, taking the 10 lakh crore allocation of last year to 13.5. And if we don't do this, then the nation will have to come to terms with a lower GDP growth. That's the choice you have in front of you, and that's the choice the government has before it.
Okay. Well, Vinayak Chatterjee, Arundhati Bhattacharya, an absolute pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here on the CNBC TV 18 Budget Ballot to take us through your big takeaway from Nirmala Sitharaman's sixth budget. Remember, she's the only finance minister after Morarji Desai to present 6 consecutive budgets. We are going to take a break. There's a lot more coming up. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal up next. Corporate guests joining us now with their take on what the interim budget means for the economy. With us, Rajiv Memani of EY, Sumant Sinha of Renew Power, and Sanjiv Puri of ITC. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the program. Sumant, one of the announcements, and perhaps one of the few new announcements that came in, was, of course, on that solar rooftop scheme. I have now got clarity that 10,000 crore rupees will be allocated for the scheme, and of course, the private sector will be involved in the scheme as well. Your takeaway on the potential benefits, the impact, the implications in the medium to long term of such a scheme?
Well, Shireen, first of all, it's really good that the scheme has been announced, because for the longest time, I think we've been struggling to get more solar on rooftops. It's been pretty difficult because there are quite a few issues and hurdles. I think this scheme has in some ways repositioned it by sort of referring to it as free Bijli, and trying to concretize the benefits that any individual homeowner will get. And I think there's also financing behind this, which therefore hopefully gives a capital subsidy to make sure that the installation of these rooftop solutions becomes cheaper. And in some ways, it actually brings, as the Prime Minister was saying, the whole issue of solar energy closer to the common person. So I think the idea is to create a whole ecosystem of installation people, equipment suppliers, and really make this a much more broad-based scheme than it was originally being sort of thought about.
Well, yes, that certainly is the case. Let me bring Sanjiv Puri back into the conversation. Sanjiv, great to have you back on the program. Of course, not much in terms of fine print to analyze this time around, but broadly, both from an investment perspective as well as a consumption perspective, where do you believe the interim budget has left us? And on the back of this, what's the hope now from the finale?
Well, I think this budget, as I said to you in the morning, reflects the ongoing approach, the ongoing vision and strategy of the government. And very clearly, it has articulated the next steps of the journey, and very important steps. And some of those, actually, they touch all the sectors of the economy, whether it's agriculture, services, or manufacturing. And I think one very important step that's been taken is to provide more resources to the private sector for innovation and research and development, and these are of long-term tenures. The private sector R&D is not to the extent that it should be, for us to develop our own IP, our own value chains, and to stand on a very solid foundation of technology. It's an area that even agriculture requires investment. So I think that's a very important pillar that's come through. I do believe that the continued focus on infrastructure, physical, digital, the focus on tourism is another great opportunity, because tourism has enormous economic multipliers. I think estimates say that as much as 50 million additional jobs can be created. It's a sector that can provide opportunity to not only enterprises building hotels, but also a lot of micro and small enterprises. There's a lot of focus on rural, a very specific focus on certain very important sectors in agriculture, be it aqua, be it the oil seeds, be it the dairy sector is the largest sector. So very important focus there. And of course, also on education and skilling. So I think a lot of the right pillars for enabling a competitive growth are in place. And as you rightly said, of course, we have to see the fine print, the details when the budget happens. But very clearly, the direction has been articulated, and the direction certainly gives a lot of hope and optimism. And it's a direction that has already delivered in the past, and we expect it to take it to the next level going forward.
Rajiv Memani, I put the comments that we were discussing in the morning to TV Somanathan, the Finance Secretary, when he was here with me a short while ago. And his point of view is that industry is getting it wrong. This is not a conservative budget by any stretch. And I'm talking about conservative from a collections point of view. He believes that this is very, very realistic. And of course, he's presented his arguments as to why he says so. Having had a look at the numbers now, Rajiv, your take on the interim budget, but more importantly, Vinayak just now saying that he doesn't believe this can be the final capex number. He thinks that come the union budget, the full budget, we are going to see the 35% number return. I wanted to understand what you make of that.
No, I think that with 10.5% growth, 12%, 11.5% increase in taxes, no major changes in tax rates. I still feel that the tax buoyancy would be slightly higher and should be slightly higher. But as you've seen, Shireen, there are lots of schemes that they've also announced, for which maybe, as the schemes get clearer, they will be making the provisions for the same. So I guess they need some room for flexibility there. The fiscal deficit target is an aggressive one, and that's why there's been a lot of conservatism on the allocations also. So if anything happens on oil, fertilizer, and everything else, you need some room for maneuvering there. I personally don't think that I don't entirely agree with Vinayak that the capex number is going to change dramatically. If they have to look at this 5.1% fiscal deficit, if this number is correct, then to dramatically change it will be difficult, because 7% GDP growth is a reasonable estimate given where global economies are. I mean, I know we are not fully impacted by that, but you can't, exports, imports do have some impact. Sentiments have some impact on that. And to allocate more than that towards capex, given that we still have, interest payments are a big composition of where we are. I think that will be difficult. Although if you see the composition of expenditure over the last 4 5 years, the revenue expenditure has steadily gone down by 2 to 3%. and the capex has moved up from, by almost from 2% roughly to 3.4%. So directionally, it's right. I mean, I don't know whether they'll change marginally or not, but I don't think there'll be much change. And I think it's good to have some room. I think there could be potentially some room on the income as well, whether it's dividend income, disinvestment receipts, whatever they have. I think there could be some room for flexibility there as well. But all in all, I would say very positive and good to keep it conservative.
Yes, Rajiv had left us with a triple C budget, continuity, consolidation. What was the third C, Rajiv?
I really liked, for me, what was most important was you didn't go for the short-term thing. So I think one was confidence and and credibility. I mean, if you look at the quality of numbers, the quality of even the quality of the fiscal deficit that is coming through, the reduction in subsidies, the increase in capex. So I think just the credibility and consistency. I think there's been no change. Broadly, even if I look at the policy announcements, most of them are towards either infrastructure, new energy, some in the auto sector, and then on innovation, FDI, and some on the PLI semiconductor piece. So overall, you just see a good pattern of where the government is really focusing on newer areas, new technologies, strengthening the infrastructure. So those are the three things I feel were kind of defining the budget.
Sumant Sinha, I'll give you the final say. How would you sum up the interim budget? And more importantly, what are the expectations now from the full budget?
Well, I think this interim budget has actually been quite a good one, I would say. To me, the biggest highlight of this was the reduction in the fiscal deficit, while keeping some spend going on capex. I would be surprised if they have fiscal room to increase spends very significantly from this point in the final budget. But even an 11% growth is not bad. I think of course the important thing is that they actually have to spend all of this money as well, and it's a fairly significant amount of capex that has to be spent. So I think the reduction in the fiscal deficit, the reduction in the borrowings, market borrowings for next year compared to this financial year by almost 7-8%, I think that's very significant. And I think what the FM in a way is signaling is that, look, the government has been doing its bit, continues to do its bit. Now it's making room a little bit for the corporate sector to come in as well. And I think it's also important now for the corporate sector to drive things forward. I think I do agree with Rajiv when he says that this is I think it's a very modern, progressive budget in that it's trying to create a very different kind of India, an India that is strong on infrastructure, an India that is focused on technology, that is focused on newer sectors, and that is focused on R&D and is focused on manufacturing. So I think that's the kind of India that is sought to be created, and I think it's terrific that we're making investments in a lot of these new areas. In just the clean energy area, for example, as you talked about rooftop solar, but there are a number of other things that are also being sought to be done, which are again, going to really put India on a leadership track as far as the whole clean energy transition and economy is concerned. And I think that's what the FM has done in a number of different sectors. So I think there are a lot of now new engines of growth that are emerging, which can hopefully drive the growth of the economy in the next several years. And all of this in the backdrop of fiscal consolidation and hopefully getting down to 4.5% next year. So I think, full marks to the FM and to the Prime Minister for maintaining that discipline and yet continue to grow the economy in directions that they really feel is important to drive our future growth and sustainable growth, at 7-8% for the next 2-3 decades into this Amrit Kal period. So I think full marks to the government for having done that.
Sanjiv Puri, the last comment.
Sorry, who was it meant for, Sreen? I think we missed that.
For you, I was asking you for the last comment to sum up the budget.
Okay, so I kind of, endorse what Suman has captured it quite well. It's a budget that's progressive, is going to make India competitive, and there are a lot of investments happening to do so. And what is very heartening to also note, I think very clearly the government is also signaling that the reform agenda will continue. I think the whole idea of incentivizing the states to progress on reforms indicates that the next generation of reforms are going to be pursued, and perhaps also some of them that need to be implemented more speedily at the state level will also be progressed through these instruments that are put in place. So I think it augurs well for the future of the economy. It augurs well for the industry and provides enough opportunity for, I think, all sections of society to actualize their potential.
Sanjiv Puri, Rajiv Memani and Sumant Sinha, many thanks for joining us here on the CNBC TV 18 Budget Headquarters to decode the interim budget and its impact. Appreciate your time. We are going to take a break here, but when we return, we'll be joined by more budget makers. Ashwini Vaishnav coming up right after this. Stay tuned.